It was just an ordinary Saturday morning when everything in my life changed. My name's Edward, and my wife, Connie, and I had been married for almost 10 years. We lived in a nice, quiet house with our 8-year-old son, Charlie. Everything seemed perfect on the outside, but behind the scenes, our marriage was starting to show cracks. Nothing dramatic, just the small things. You know, routine, monotony. The passion we once had seemed like a distant memory buried under school runs and grocery lists. Connie and I were still in love, no doubt about that, but something was missing. We had become comfortable, maybe too comfortable, with the same routine day in and day out. I could feel it slipping, but I guess I just thought it was normal. I never imagined she'd be the one to shatter that bubble of safety. Last Wednesday, Connie had taken a trip into the city. She loved shopping in Soho, something about the vibe there that made her feel alive again, I guess. She told me she'd just be gone for a couple of hours to grab a few things for the house. I didn't think anything of it. Just another trip, just another day. But that's when it happened. She met him. It was a chance encounter, at least that's what she told me later. She was juggling shopping bags and her phone when she ran into a stranger, James Lockhart. From what she explained, she tripped on the sidewalk, scraping her knee pretty badly. James, a suave and charming British man, rushed to help her. She claimed there was nothing more than a polite exchange at first. He invited her to his nearby apartment to clean up her scrapes, and without thinking, she accepted. I asked her why she didn't just go to a cafe or even come home. She didn't have a solid answer for that, just mumbled something about feeling embarrassed by her fall and how kind James had seemed. She said he offered her a drink while tending to her knees, and even though she felt a little uneasy, she stayed for a bit longer than she should have. I could see her struggling with something when she told me this part, like she was leaving out some details. She said she left soon after, but I saw something in her eyes, something that told me there was more to the story. I should have asked more questions, pushed harder, but at that moment, I let it go. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find if I dug deeper. Maybe I didn't want to acknowledge the knot of unease twisting in my gut. I didn't know it then, but that simple encounter was the beginning of something dark. Something that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my wife. The days after that encounter were tense. Connie tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just a random run-in with a kind stranger, nothing more. But I could tell something was different about her. Something had shifted. There was a distance between us, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then one evening, after Charlie had gone to bed, I saw her holding something in her hands, a small book. It didn't look like one of her usual reads. When she saw me noticing, she quickly tucked it away, but I caught a glimpse of a name, James Lockhart. My stomach twisted again, that familiar unease creeping back in, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. The next morning, while I was getting ready for work, Connie was unusually quiet. She was distracted, checking her phone repeatedly, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. I left for the office, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I didn't know that Connie had found James' phone number in the book he'd given her after their first meeting. That afternoon, while I was caught up in meetings, Connie made the call. She told me later it was innocent at first, just a quick conversation to thank him for his kindness that day. But when she heard his voice, something inside her stirred. Something dangerous, something she couldn't control. He was charming, as always, and before she knew it, he was inviting her back to his apartment. She hesitated but found herself agreeing. She told herself it was just for a quick visit, nothing more. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. When she arrived at his Soho apartment, the air was thick with tension. The moment James opened the door, that magnetic pull between them was undeniable. He flirted with her, as he had before, but this time it was more intense. She said she tried to resist, reminding herself she was a married woman with a family. But the way he looked at her, the way his words dripped with subtle seduction, it was impossible to ignore. Still, she left, heart racing, and made her way back home. But she couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he made her feel, alive, wanted, desired in a way she hadn't felt in years. So, she went back. When she arrived, the tension had only grown stronger. They danced, close and slow, and as their bodies pressed together, The line between right and wrong blurred until it disappeared completely. Connie knew she was playing with fire, but she didn't care anymore. She was in too deep. She left again, but this time, she wasn't gone for long. When she returned to retrieve her coat, James was waiting. Without a word, he swept her off her feet, literally lifting her in his arms. She said she felt weightless in that moment, completely surrendering to whatever was about to happen. He carried her into his bedroom, and that was it, the point of no return. They had sex. Connie's voice trembled when she told me this part. She tried to explain it, to justify it in some way. She said it was as if she were caught in a whirlwind, unable to stop herself. She described it as both terrifying and exhilarating, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. But as she lay in his bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, reality crashed down around her. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. After that first night with James, Connie couldn't get him out of her mind. She would sit at the breakfast table with me and Charlie, pretending everything was fine, but I could see it in her eyes. She was somewhere else. The guilt was eating away at her, but that didn't stop her from going back. I noticed little changes in her. She became more preoccupied, constantly checking her phone, and her usual routine started to shift. I would ask her about her day, and she'd give vague, rehearsed answers that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't long before I started feeling like I was losing her, like she was slipping through my fingers. One evening, after putting Charlie to bed, I noticed Connie quietly placing a new pair of shoes in her closet. They were expensive, the kind she wouldn't usually buy. Then there was the lingerie, new, lacy, and completely out of character for her. We hadn't been intimate in weeks, and yet, she was dressing as if she were preparing for someone. The next day, I casually asked her to meet me for lunch. I wanted to see her, to talk, to figure out what was going on with us. But instead of agreeing, she hesitated. I can't, she said, avoiding my gaze. I've got a salon appointment. I've been putting it off, and I really need to get it done. Something about the way she said it, the nervousness in her voice, it didn't feel right. My gut told me something was wrong, something more than just a trip to the salon. So, when she left for her supposed appointment, I made a decision. I called the salon. The receptionist on the other end was polite but confused. Connie Whitman? I asked, trying to sound casual. I wanted to confirm her appointment for this afternoon. There was a pause. I felt my heart race in the silence. I'm sorry, sir, the receptionist replied, but we don't have anyone by that name scheduled for today. My heart sank. She had lied. I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was deeply wrong. After discovering that Connie had lied about her salon appointment, my suspicions only grew. It wasn't just about her distant behavior anymore. It was about uncovering the truth. I needed answers, but I didn't know where to turn. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator, Frank Thompson, a man with a reputation for uncovering the ugly truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. A few weeks passed, and I tried to carry on as if everything was normal. Connie continued her strange behavior, coming home late, making excuses about errands, or picking up Charlie from school. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that she was just going through something, and we'd work it out. But that nagging doubt never left me. Then Frank called. "We need to meet," he said, his voice as calm and collected as ever. "I've got something you're going to want to see." We met in a small cafe off the beaten path, away from prying eyes. Frank sat across from me, sliding an envelope across the table. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a stack of photographs. There she was, Connie. But she wasn't alone. She was with him, James. The photographs showed them together, holding hands, leaning in close. One of the images showed them kissing in broad daylight. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. The betrayal was more than I could bear. This wasn't just some mistake or misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. She had lied to me, to our son, and to herself. Frank didn't say much. He didn't need to. The evidence was right there in front of me. My wife was having an affair. After that, things spiraled. Connie's visits to James became more frequent. She would stay out longer, forgetting to pick up Charlie from school. I had to make excuses, both to him and to myself, as if somehow pretending it wasn't happening would make it go away. But it didn't. One evening, after a particularly late night, Connie came home looking disheveled and guilty. She was quiet, distant, avoiding eye contact. I didn't need to ask her where she'd been. I already knew. It was clear she couldn't keep up the charade any longer. The weight of the affair, the lies, the guilt, it was finally starting to crush her. I watched her retreat to the bathroom, closing the door behind her. Minutes later, I heard the faint sound of sobbing. The next day, she tried to act like everything was normal, but I knew. She was trying to figure out how to end it with James. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she moved through the house, running errands like it was just another day. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just running errands. She was preparing to close a chapter that should never have been opened. I stood at the top of the staircase, frozen in place. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling as I leaned against the cold railing. I wasn't supposed to be here, at least, not like this. I had hired the private investigator out of sheer desperation, and it was his tip that brought me here today. But what I hadn't expected was this. I had been prepared to confront James, to lay everything bare, to demand answers. But instead, I found myself listening to the sounds I had hoped I would never hear. The sounds of my wife, Connie, locked in another man's embrace. Her moans, mixed with the muffled, hurried breaths of passion, hit me like a freight train. My legs wobbled, threatening to give out beneath me. It wasn't just sex. It wasn't just an affair. It was the final confirmation that my marriage, our family, was unraveling right in front of me. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to rip him away from her. But all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by the sheer weight of betrayal. The confrontation had started innocently enough. I followed Connie here, hoping for answers. I had seen her leave the house, her excuses weak and transparent. Deep down, I had known something was wrong for weeks. She was distant, secretive, and I had tried to brush it off. But when I saw her new shoes, her new underwear, and her frequent appointments, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I hired Frank Thompson, the private investigator, hoping he'd tell me I was wrong. But when he produced the photographs, Connie and James together, the truth was impossible to ignore. I hadn't planned on confronting her today, but as I arrived at James's building, I saw her. She was following him up the stairs, just behind another woman. Connie's face was twisted with anger, jealousy. She confronted him, her voice echoing down the stairwell, demanding answers about the other woman. My heart ached watching her, still so caught up in this man who had taken everything from me. James, calm as ever, brushed her off, telling her that the other woman was just a friend. I could barely hear his words, but the dismissive tone was clear. Connie wasn't having any of it. She yelled, called him a liar, said she hated him. For a moment, I thought she might leave, but she didn't. Instead, James grabbed her. He pushed her against the wall, pinning her there, his hands roaming over her body. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the scene unfolding in front of me. I saw Connie struggle, trying to resist, but then, like every other time, she gave in. She always gave in. Right there, in the stairwell, they had sex. Fast, reckless, almost desperate. My world shattered as I watched the woman I had loved for over a decade betray me in the most intimate way. I felt my throat tighten, a mix of anger and sorrow clawing at me from the inside. When it was over, Connie adjusted her clothes hastily, her face a mask of guilt and confusion. She didn't see me. She hurried down the stairs, her mind probably racing just like mine. I wanted to scream at her, to tear James apart. But all I could do was watch as my wife disappeared into the distance, leaving me alone with the deafening silence of my crumbling life. When I stepped into James's apartment, my anger was barely contained. I had come to confront him, to make sense of why he thought he could come into my life and destroy everything. Every second spent imagining him with Connie had fueled my rage, and now, standing in his space, I was ready to make him understand the consequences of his actions. James greeted me casually, like I was just some unexpected guest, completely unbothered by the fact that I was Connie's husband. His arrogance made my skin crawl. "So, you're here about Connie?" he asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, as if this was nothing to him. His tone was light, almost mocking, and that only made my blood boil more. "Yeah, let's talk about Connie," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. He started rambling about how Connie made him feel alive, how she was different from anyone he had ever met, how she had chosen him. It was disgusting to listen to, and I clenched my fists to keep myself from lunging at him right then and there. That's when I saw it, a snow globe. It was sitting on his bookshelf, right next to some random books. But it wasn't just any snow globe. It was the snow globe, the one I had given Connie years ago for our anniversary. I had chosen it carefully, a memento of our love, a symbol of our bond. And now, it was sitting in James's apartment, like some trophy. James saw me staring at it, and had the nerve to smirk. "Oh, that," he said casually. "Connie gave it to me. Thought I should have something to remember her by." The moment he said that, something inside me snapped. Before I even realized what I was doing, I crossed the room and grabbed the snow globe off the shelf. But I didn't smash it. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, the significance of what it meant. This snow globe was a piece of my life, of my marriage, and here it was, tainted by his presence. "You don't get to keep this," I muttered through clenched teeth. James laughed, like this whole thing was just some joke. That's when I lost control. I lunged at him, swinging the snow globe toward him, not to break it, but to make him back off. He dodged, but the force sent him stumbling backward. He tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. His head collided with the edge of the counter, and before I could process what had just happened, he crumpled to the floor. It took me a moment to realize he wasn't moving. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was silent, save for my own breathing. I hadn't meant for this to happen. I hadn't meant to. James was dead. Panic set in. I looked around the room, my mind racing. I needed to clean up, to erase any sign of what had happened. I scrambled to wipe down surfaces, to hide any evidence that I had been there. I knew I had to act fast, to think clearly, but my thoughts were clouded by the enormity of what I had done. And then I heard it, Connie's voice. It came from James's answering machine. I stood still, listening as she left a message. "James, I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't keep lying. I'm hurting my family, and I'm hurting myself. This has to end. I'm sorry, but this is it. It's over." She was ending it. She had already made up her mind. But it didn't matter now. It was too late. Everything was already ruined. I deleted the message. I couldn't let anyone hear it, not now. I had to make this go away. I wiped the phone clean, gathered my things, and dragged James's lifeless body to the car. Hours later, I dumped him in a landfill, hoping the garbage would swallow up the evidence of what had happened. But no matter how much I tried to bury the truth, it wouldn't leave me. The image of James's broken body, the sound of Connie's voice, they haunted me. And now, I had to go back home, to pretend like nothing had changed, like everything was fine. I walked through the door of our house, trying to act normal, but the weight of what I had done hung over me like a shadow. In the morning, when the police detectives arrived at our house, I had the most unsettling feeling in my life. Connie went about her normal business as if nothing had happened, but I saw that the break with James was pressing on her from the inside. I tried my best to hold on, but the guilt gnawed at me. "Good morning. We're here to ask a few questions," one of them said, his eyes darting between Connie and me. "It's about James Harper. His estranged wife reported him missing." I could feel Connie stiffen next to me, and for a brief moment, I thought she might break. But she held it together, giving the detectives a puzzled look. "James? I barely know him," she said, her voice measured but with an edge of uncertainty. The detectives asked a few more questions, probing gently but purposefully. Connie stuck to her story. She had only met James briefly, nothing more. I remained quiet, watching their every move. Eventually, they left, promising to be in touch if they had any more questions. As soon as they were gone, I felt the tension in the room rise. We didn't talk about it, though. Neither of us wanted to. A week later, they came back. The moment I saw their faces, I knew they had found his body. "Mr. and Mrs. Smith," the detective began, his tone somber. "We've discovered James Harper's body. I watched as Connie's face went pale, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She played her part perfectly, but I could see right through her. She wasn't just acting. She was truly scared. How did he die? Connie stammered, her voice barely a whisper. We're still investigating, but it's clear there was foul play involved, the detective replied. He studied Connie's reaction carefully, probably noting the way her hands shook, the way she avoided eye contact. When did you say you met him? Connie hesitated, but then she gave a lie that took me by surprise. It was at a fundraiser. We met briefly, that's all. I knew she was scared, and I knew why. She thought I didn't know, thought she had kept her secret well hidden, but I had known for a while. I looked at the detective and nodded, confirming her lie. Yes, that's right. I remember the event. The detectives left after a few more questions, satisfied for the time being, but I could feel the storm brewing inside our home. That night, as I sat in my study, I heard Connie moving around in the living room. Curious, I followed her, only to find her standing by the table, holding a stack of photographs. Her face went pale as she flipped through them. They were photos of her and James. Pictures I had found, printed, and kept hidden. Until now. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. You knew, she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She looked past me then, her eyes landing on the snow globe, the very one I had given her for our anniversary. It sat neatly back in our collection, as if it had never been in James's apartment at all. She understood in that moment what I had done. You killed him, she said, her voice trembling. I stepped closer to her, my face hardening. I wanted to kill you, I admitted coldly, but I couldn't, so I killed him instead. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse under the weight of everything. But Connie wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile. She composed herself, wiping away the tears as she stared at me. What now? She asked, her voice hollow. I watched as she moved to the fireplace, throwing the photographs of her and James into the flames. The pictures curled and burned, the evidence of their affair turning to ash. I'll turn myself in, I said, almost resigned. I can't keep living with this. No, Connie said firmly, shaking her head. We'll move on. We'll find a way. We didn't speak much after that, but something shifted between us. An unspoken agreement, a dark bond forged in the aftermath of what I had done. And somehow, we did return to our lives, pretending everything was fine, even though nothing would ever be the same. Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they chilled me to the bone. I realized then that we weren't moving on. We were trapped. Trapped in the lies, the murder, the betrayal. We would never be free. In the end, we returned to our lives, playing the role of the perfect family. On the outside, we were normal. But inside, we were broken, haunted by the past we couldn't escape. From my perspective, things between Connie and me had returned to some strange balance after she burned those photos of her and James. But it was just that strange. There was no true peace, only an unsettling calm. I was haunted by what I had done, and yet the gnawing feeling of uncertainty about her kept my mind on edge. Did she mourn him, or did she secretly thank me for getting rid of him? Her silence said everything and nothing. Days passed, then weeks, and in that time, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Paranoia crept in like an unwelcome guest. Connie's moods began to shift in ways I couldn't pin down. Her laughter felt forced, her touches stiff. There were moments when I'd catch her lingering over the snow globe. Our snow globe, the one I'd given her as a symbol of our life together, as if it held some dark secret only she understood. And those sidelong glances, the moments when I'd bring up anything remotely close to James, and she'd quickly change the topic. One evening, as we were both sitting down to dinner, she looked at me with an intensity one hadn't seen before. Then, out of nowhere, she broke the silence. "We need to talk," she said, her voice laced with a strange finality. My stomach twisted. My mind raced with the possibilities of what she might say. Did she know? Had she pieced it all together? Or worse, was she about to tell me that she couldn't let go of James after all, that his memory still lingered between us? I felt myself brace for whatever was coming next. When Connie uttered those words, "It's James," my world shattered. My mind went blank, as if every coherent thought had been ripped away, replaced by a void. She was carrying his child. The man I killed, the man who'd stolen my wife and now, even in death, would be part of my life forever. I felt like I'd been struck by something heavy and sharp, lodging deep into a place inside me I never knew existed. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to think or breathe. Raising another man's child? A constant, breathing reminder of my failure, my crime, and my shame. I managed to ask, How could this happen? My voice sounded hollow to my own ears, almost as if it came from someone else. Connie's answer barely registered. Her expression was oddly resigned, like she had already accepted whatever came next. I didn't know, Edward. I thought it would just go away. As the days passed, my mind became a battlefield. Every time I looked at her, I could see James, as if he hadn't really left, as if he was there mocking me, laughing at the life he'd stolen, still lingering in our home and our marriage. My guilt began to mutate into something darker, something twisted. The child she carried became a part of him, an inescapable reminder that would soon be breathing, laughing, and living in my home, under my roof. The world around me grew warped, distorted, as visions of James seemed to follow me wherever I went. In my reflection, his face stared back at me. The shadows took on his shape. I began hearing his voice in empty rooms, taunting me, laughing. The line between reality and illusion thinned until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. In those moments of clarity that would occasionally break through the fog, I'd catch Connie watching me, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer apologies or try to soothe my rage. Instead, there was a distance in her gaze, an acceptance that seemed like she'd given up on us. She insisted that we could move on, that we could raise this child and find some kind of peace. But how could I, knowing that every day I'd be faced with a reminder of her betrayal, of my own crime? The resentment, the hatred, both for her and for myself, grew with each passing day. The final betrayal. That night, something woke me. The bed beside me was empty, the sheets cold. I strained my ears and heard a soft murmur from downstairs, like someone speaking under their breath. Moving silently, I made my way to the kitchen door. There she was, back to me, the phone cradled close to her ear, her words barely audible but sharp, urgent. "No, he doesn't know," Connie whispered, her tone edged with anxiety. "He's already losing it. If he finds out, I'm not sure what he'd do. Just give me a little more time." A chill ran down my spine. Who was she talking to? My mind raced, jumping to the worst conclusions. Was she planning something? Was she in touch with someone who knew about James, someone from his life? Or maybe even the police? The anger surged, white-hot, drowning out any last restraint I had. "Who are you talking to?" I barked, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. Connie spun around, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. She stammered, scrambling for an excuse, but I could already see through it, clear as day. The last thin thread of trust one had was gone, severed in an instant. "You're lying to me again," I shouted, my voice rising as the fury poured out. "You think I'll just sit here and pretend this is normal? That I'll play house with you, with his child, after everything?" Connie stepped back, her eyes filling with panic. She tried to explain, to calm me, but my own rage drowned out her words. Grabbing her by the shoulders, I shook her, every repressed resentment boiling to the surface. It wasn't James the first had wanted dead. It was her, the one who tore everything apart. But just as quickly as the rage had taken over, a strange clarity washed through me. I let her go, stepping back, my hands shaking. "I'm done," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I can't carry this anymore. I'll turn myself in." Connie reached out, her face stricken. "No, Edward, please," she begged. "We can still make this work. We can still move forward." But it was too late. The resentment, the betrayal, all of it had twisted something deep within me beyond repair. "I should have killed you," I muttered coldly, the realization chilling even me. "It was always you." I walked away, leaving her there, collapsing to the floor in tears. As I stepped out, I felt both freed and damned, knowing our lives were forever changed. And maybe, for the first time, I was ready to face the consequences. The last twist came not in some dramatic confession at a police station, nor in any kind of justice served. Instead, I simply vanished. I left everything behind, like some specter fading into shadows, leaving Connie alone with her lies and her choices. She would raise that child by herself, left to explain away the past however she could. Years drifted by, and though I never once returned, I managed to stay hidden in the quiet corners of my mind, watching her life unfold from afar. She was raising him, our son, or rather, his son, a boy who grew to resemble James more with every passing year. Each time I heard even a whisper of that resemblance, it tightened the old knot in my chest, the one that hadn't loosened since the day she first betrayed me. I imagine Connie's life now, bound by a cycle of guilt and loss that she must replay each time she looks at his face. And while she carries on, each look she shares with that child is also a look backward into the dark, twisted truths that tie us together and keep me, in some way, forever present in her life. What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.